New diesel cars and taxis will be banned from 2025 as Singapore budgets for a greener future.
More nature parks and energy-efficient buildings, all part of the plan to build a more livable city.
And 3 new hawker centres run by socially conscious enterprises are set to open in the coming months. It's 5:30 p.m. here in Singapore, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
I'm Haryanto Diman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. Opening the debate on the government's sustainability plans in Parliament today, Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean said climate change poses an existential challenge for Singapore. But our unique constraints mean the trade-offs it faces in cutting its emissions are much starker than other countries.
So Mr. Teo, who chairs the Inter-Ministerial Committee on Climate Change, said overcoming these constraints needs to be done through long-term planning as well as innovations in policy and technology.
For a small island city-state like Singapore, climate change poses an asymmetrical challenge. While Singapore contributes around 0.1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, the totality of global emissions, 100%, including the other 99.9%, affects us too, and often more seriously than it affects larger, better endowed countries. Our carbon emissions set real, cross-cutting constraints on our development and the daily lives of Singaporeans. We need to find ways to break out of these constraints through careful long-term planning and innovations in policy and technology. We look for synergies to give ourselves the space to grow. But when it is needed, we also have to make well-considered real trade-offs.
In a wide-ranging speech, Mr. Teo outlined how Singapore is taking a considered, committed and collective approach to the global climate crisis. For one, the carbon tax better aligns the real cost of carbon emissions with the emitter.
At the national level, our comprehensive carbon tax, which covers 80% of Singapore's carbon emissions, one of the most comprehensive coverages in the world, encapsulates these trade-offs by better aligning the real cost of carbon emissions with the emitter. As DPM said in his budget speech, the government will be reviewing the trajectory and level of the carbon tax post-2023 in consultation with industry and expert groups. We seek a carbon tax level that will incentivize companies and consumers to switch to carbon-friendly products, services, and activities while promoting industry innovation and new green growth.
And responding to MPs' questions on whether Singapore plans to set more ambitious climate goals, Mr. Teo said that the current goals aren't meant to be static.
We will press ahead with the measures which are within our control, and we will halve our emissions by 2030. But how soon we can achieve net zero, that means eliminate the other half, depends not only on what we do, but it depends on what is done internationally in areas such as evolving and maturing key technologies, as well as international collaboration on key areas such as carbon markets, as well as the import and export of green electricity. We will continue to review our climate goals with the aim of achieving net zero emissions as soon as viable.
Sustainability and the Environment Minister Grace Fu announced 4 key shifts in a refreshed GreenGov.sg initiative, with the public sector leading by example. Carbon emissions from this sector will hit the maximum by around 2025, 5 years ahead of the national target to peak emissions.
GreenGov.sg will see the public sector taking the lead as well in 3 other areas, including setting sustainability targets not just for government-owned offices, but also for public sector infrastructure like public transport infrastructure, hawker centres and healthcare facilities.
With this expanded scope, the public sector will take on a greater responsibility to enhance the sustainability of our operations. Third, we will embed sustainability practices in the public sector's core business areas and influence our service providers and suppliers to be more sustainable. One key tool is in green procurement. As a major consumer of goods and services, the public sector can and will influence the industry towards sustainable business choices and practices by incorporating more sustainability requirements in our procurement framework. Fourth, we will build an organizational culture of sustainability and grow the movements amongst public service officers.
Ms. Fu's announcements follows last month's release of the Singapore Green Plan 2030, a blueprint charting the way for Singapore to reach net zero emissions as soon as possible.
Well, Ms. Fu also said Singapore will be looking into how more of its coastlines can be shored up against rising sea levels with new protection strategies in 4 coastal areas to be completed by 2030. The coastlines are along the city east coast stretch, Lim Chu Kang, Sungai Kadut and around Jurong Island.
For City East Coast and Jurong, PUB and JTC will embark on site-specific studies, and potential measures to be examined include sea walls, polders and nature-based solutions like mangrove planting.
As for Lim Chu Kang and Sungai Kadut, PUB told the Straits Times that it plans to call the tenders for studies there this year. They are expected to commence in 2022 and be completed in 2027.
As Singapore transitions from a garden city to a city in nature, around 1,000 hectares of green spaces will be added over the next 10 to 15 years. This as set out in the Urban Redevelopment Authority's master plan back in 2019.
In an update today, National Development Minister Desmond Lee said this includes 130 hectares of new parks and the redevelopment of another 170 hectares of existing parks over the next 6 years.
And by 2030, every household will be within a 10-minute walk from a park, as park connector networks will be expanded by 500 kilometers.
By incorporating natural designs and plantings into our parks and streetscapes, they can serve as nature-based solutions to help provide shade, cool the environment, improve air quality, enhance flood resilience, and beautify our city. These are just some of the benefits and outcomes that we hope to see from our city in nature efforts, which Professor Koh Lim Ping had asked about yesterday. And one example of this can be seen at Jurong Lake Gardens, our 3rd national garden. We converted a concrete canal into a series of meandering streams with vegetated wetlands that play host to charismatic wildlife such as otters and herons. Such naturalized waterways can help slow down water runoff from surrounding areas, reducing the risk of flash floods. We will naturalize more waterways and water bodies in parks and gardens in this manner as part of our city in nature efforts.
There will also be more focus on creating energy-efficient buildings. Sustainability-related R&D efforts will also be ramped up as part of a long-term strategy to build a more livable city.
Now, Science and Environment correspondent Audrey Tan is here to make sense of these latest announcements. Audrey, let's talk about greengov.sg first. It builds on an existing initiative that's been in place since 2006. So what's new about this one?
So there are a couple of new pillars for greengov.sg, and Ms. Grace Fu said that more details will be released later in the year. But I guess one of the more headline new targets that are set under greengov.sg is for the public sector to peak its emissions by 2025. So that means the public sector, government offices and public infrastructure would actually increase emissions until 2025 before ramping down. So a similar target was set nationally, and that was to peak emissions by 2030. So what greengov.sg is for the public sector to peak its emissions 5 years before the rest of the nation.
On that note, Audrey, let's clear something up here, because I had the impression that under the Green Plan 2030, we're aiming to reduce emissions by 2030, but what you just said, and that's according to greengov.sg, the target is to maximize emissions by 2030. So isn't all of that counterintuitive to the whole green effort to reduce our emissions?
So the 2030 target was actually set some time ago as part of our targets under the Paris Agreement. So Singapore has pledged that it will peak its emissions at 2030 and then halve that amount by 2050. And the longer term target is for us to reach net zero as soon as possible in the second half of the century. So like you pointed out, it means that we still have 9 more years of increasing emissions, and that is something that has been the subject of criticism among the environmental community here. But as we have heard from the ministers today, there's a lot of talk about trade-offs and constraints. So right now, I guess Singapore is trying to manage within these constraints that the government has set out and try to reduce emissions as far as possible. But I guess despite our efforts, in terms of like petrochemical industry is not going to go away so soon, and we can continue seeing our emissions go up in the nearer term future.
Right. I want to pick up on that.
Trade-offs?
Audrey, on trade-offs, because we heard Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean as well said that the trade-offs for a greener Singapore are much starker. What does he mean by that?
So I think he mentioned 3 different types of constraints, right? Land, manpower, and access to renewable energy. So access to renewable energy is a pertinent point because if you look at the majority of our emissions, they come from the use of fossil fuels for our energy. Currently, 95% of our energy comes from the burning of natural gas. It is the cleanest form of fossil fuel, but it's still a fossil fuel nonetheless. So what are alternatives to fossil fuels? You would need renewables. And in Singapore, we don't have large acres of land for extensive solar panel farms or solar farms. We do not have access to tidal energy, wind energy, geothermal energy. So we are constrained in this area. So that's one. In terms of land use, it has come up in SM's speech, and it has also come up in interviews that I've done with, like, for example, National Development Minister Desmond Lee, who has talked about how Singapore is a city that needs to incorporate all the needs of a country. So if you think about countries overseas, right, they can locate everything they need within a city, but things that maybe like in terms of meeting water needs or farming for food, they can always locate it on the outskirts in rural areas, but this is something that Singapore does not have. So it has to ensure that it meets all its needs within our 720 square kilometers of land. So that is another constraint that we have to deal with. And the last thing is manpower, right? We have seen what Exxon has said recently about cutting jobs, same with Shell, and there's always the need to transition away from it. But in this great green transition, it is the workers who will have to bear the brunt of this. So I guess that's what he meant by all these constraints that Singapore has to deal with, and how we would face the cost of these challenges more harshly than perhaps other countries as well.
I see. Well, let's talk more about what Ms. Grace Fu also mentioned about how we're going to, shore up our coastlines against rising sea levels. Could you share more on Singapore's plans to protect our coastlines?
Yeah. So, earlier what we're talking about emissions and all that comes under mitigation, right? How Singapore wants to reduce its carbon footprint. But of course, when you talk about climate change, you cannot just look at that. You have to look at how you're going to prepare for the effects of climate change as well. So sea level rise is, of course, an issue that is of concern for us, a low-lying country. So she did mention that there are 4 areas, 4 different coastlines that are being looked at. Earlier, just now we've seen the sites, City East Coast and Jurong Island. These are areas that have already been identified in public speeches before, and at that point the government has said that these areas are identified because they are low-lying, they are highly urbanized. Your East Coast Park is there, and Jurong Island is highly, a lot of important infrastructure there as well. So today what we've heard is that the northwestern coast will also be looked at, and the northwestern coast is perhaps, you will be familiar with places like Sungai Buloh, Kranji, right? So that is an area, and why PUB said is because firstly that's where a lot of key infrastructure are located. Think your Woodlands checkpoint, your Kranji reservoir, they're all there. And also it's going to be a lot, the location of many important industries, so timber industry, and what we have seen with the Agri-Food Innovation Park, there's going to be a huge agri-tech sector is there as well. So that is an area that Singapore is looking into to try to beef up and shore up our coastal protection as well.
Right. Well, Audrey, thank you so much for joining us. I always feel that we get a really good education whenever we talk to you on the show. We've been speaking with Audrey Tan, Science and Environment Correspondent for the Straits Times. StraitsTimes.com has all the details on the government's sustainability plans outlined in Parliament today.
In yet another push for cleaner vehicles here, Transport Minister Ong Ye Kung announced that no more new diesel cars and taxis will be allowed to be registered from 2025.
This is 5 years earlier than the target to have all new vehicles be cleaner energy models by 2030.
Today, in aggregate, vehicles on the whole emit about 6.4 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. And if a subset of light vehicles all ran on electricity, the total net carbon abatement would be about 1.5 to 2 million tons per year of CO2 equivalent per year. So this abatement is about 4% of our total annual emissions. So not insignificant. Hence, the Green Plan includes a push for EVs. We have a 2040 target to phase out ICEs and have all vehicles run on cleaner energy. And to realize this vision, and given that COEs for cars last for 10 years, we will require from 2030 all new car and taxi registrations to be of cleaner energy models.
Mr. Ong also said road tax for mass-market electric cars will be lowered from next year to be on par with equivalent models powered by combustion energy engines.
Road tax for e-cars were already lowered in January by as much as 40%, but the larger mass-market electric models still incur more road tax than petrol equivalents.
To address this, Mr. Ong said road taxes for e-cars in the 90 to 230 kilowatts power band will be adjusted further.
We will merge the current electric car road tax bands of 30 to 90 kilowatts and 90 to 230 kilowatts, merge them into one band and subject them to the current road tax formula of the lower band, the 30 to 90 kilowatt band. Long and short of it is we will bring down the road taxes of electric cars in the upper band. Using the examples earlier, a Hyundai Kona Electric will see its annual road tax fall from about $1,400 to $1,100. That of a Tesla Model 3 will drop from $2,300 per year to $1,500. And this will make their road taxes comparable to ICE models with a similar look and feel.
Mr. Ong also announced details of the 60,000 charging points which will be built by 2030. 40,000 will be in public car parks, with the remaining 20,000 in private premises.
He added that the government aims to have at least 8 EV-ready towns by 2025, where every HDB car park in these towns will be fitted with charging points. And by the 2030s, the government will strive to make every HDB town EV-ready.
Second Minister for Trade and Industry Tan See Leng told Parliament that electricity prices are likely to increase. This as Singapore's electricity overcapacity situation normalizes and fuel prices rise.
Let's take a look at the big announcements from Parliament today. Trade and Industry Minister Chan Chun Sing announced that Sentosa will be transformed into a carbon-neutral destination by 2030. Among its key priorities are to decarbonize energy systems, reduce food waste and green travel options.
Meanwhile, the Education Ministry will introduce an eco-stewardship program in all schools from primary to pre-university. This in an effort to strengthen formal and informal environmental education. MOE also aims to reduce carbon emissions from schools by at least 2/3 by 2030.
3 new hawker centres will open this year and early next year, which will go towards safeguarding our hawker culture. The Bukit Canberra Hawker Centre of Sembawang and the Fernvale Hawker Centre and Market in Sengkang are expected to open in the 4th quarter of this year. Meanwhile, Senja Hawker Centre in Bukit Panjang is expected to open early next year.
And a regime to clean up and disinfect public spaces will be rolled out progressively. From July, it will target more than 2,000 high-risk premises like preschools, schools, youth and elder care facilities. The initial phase has a targeted completion date by the end of this financial year.
An update on the COVID-19 situation here. 1 community case was among the 19 new infections confirmed today.
The remaining 18 were imported cases. They were all placed on stay-home notice upon arrival in Singapore, and more details will be released later tonight.
Transactions facilitated by SingPass last year doubled to over 170 million as more people turned to digital transactions during the pandemic. The number of people using the mobile app also tripled in the past year to 2.5 million. The Government Technology Agency gave this update as it launched the new SingPass logo, which will be updated on the website and app from Sunday.
According to the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, Singapore's economy is the most free in the world this year for the second year in a row. The US think tank said today that the country scored 0.3 more points than last year, primarily due to an improvement in points for government spending. Singapore's score placed it far ahead of both the regional average for 40 countries in Asia Pacific as well as the world average.
Time for this weekend's live picks. Now, the first pick is bittersweet. I'm talking about the arts festival by the Substation, whose imminent permanent closure made headlines this week.
So just when it's finally back after a 6-year hiatus, this edition of SeptFest could be the Substation's last. And as you can tell from its name, SeptFest is usually held in September to commemorate the Substation's anniversary on September the 16th.
Journalist Toh Wen Li joins us to share more. Wen Li, SeptFest returns after 6 years. And this year also marks the 31st anniversary of the Substation. On top of that, we don't know if it will, ever come around again. With all these elements, this year's festival feels more meaningful, so to speak. So are there any special performances to commemorate the occasion?
Yeah, so as you know, this is the last SeptFest. The Substation recently announced its plans to close permanently after vacating its premises on 45 Armenian Street. In terms of highlights, well, there is a multidisciplinary immersive experience called The Last Chapter, which pays homage to the Substation's history and is curated by artist Lim Chin Huat and takes place in different parts of the building. So essentially, various characters will get visitors to rediscover the Substation's nooks and crannies and find out more about stories and histories. So SeptFest itself happens from today, March the 4th to March 28th. It's a month-long festival and there'll be lots of things to look forward to.
Right. Speaking of things to look forward to, this year's theme is called In the Margins, and it covers the marginalized, displaced and forgotten communities who are often out of sight. So Wen Li, what kind of performances and exhibitions will patrons get to see under this theme?
Yeah, so there'll be theatre, there'll be dance, spoken word, exhibitions by emerging as well as more established artists. Unfortunately, virtually all the ticketed shows are sold out, but there are wait lists. So if you're interested, you can also stay tuned, sign up for the wait list, and they'll keep you posted. There are 2 exhibitions which are free of charge and non-ticketed, and these will be happening in the Substation's gallery. The first one is Project Orang Asli, which features works by artists, including the acclaimed Zai Kuning. Zai has been documenting the life and rituals of the Orang Asli and is presenting his works in the gallery. So there'll be photos, video documentation, and writing. And there will also be another exhibition in the gallery called the Migrant Workers Community Museum, which is essentially an attempt to gather some artifacts contributed by migrant workers in Singapore. So it brings together this working group of migrant workers, artists, and activists. So yeah, definitely worth heading down, even if you don't get a chance to see the ticketed performances. It'd be good to make a trip down to the Substation before it closes for good later this year.
Well, we appreciate your time, Wen Li. SeptFest starts today and will run for 4 weeks until March the 28th. As we mentioned earlier, this could be the last one, so do make it a point to catch it this month.
In a review already on the Straits Times' website, journalist Jan Lee says new Korean drama How to Be 30 is a great way to unwind over a quick dinner because each episode is only about 20 minutes.
That's quick.
So besides the snappy pacing, tell us more about this one, Jan. It seems to have gone under the radar quite a little bit.
Yes, so it's actually a series in South Korea that is aired online. It's on Kakao. So it's a web series. That's why it's so short. It's not aired on broadcast, if I'm not wrong. So it's on iQIYI in Singapore. I think that's why it's gone under the radar a little bit. But Honey, EXID, girl group EXID's Honey is in it. And Honey's pretty popular. So there is some traction amongst K-pop fans. The male lead is also CN Blues drummer Kang Min Hyuk. So, amongst K-pop fans, there's some knowledge of it, but I wouldn't say that it's like widely known, which is why I thought I would introduce it.
So Jen, what is the series about actually? I think judging by the title, I can guess that it's about people in their 30s.
Like in that mode, you know, of women in their 30s navigating their life, their relationships and their careers, you know. So it sounds a bit like Sex and the City in that mode, but I would say it's quite different from like previous this type of dramas with like women in their 30s. It's actually like two of the women quite obviously don't have a lot of experience in romance. One of them was with the same guy for 9 years. These are the characters. One of them sort of like focused on a career, got really successful, and then just sort of never really had anything in the guy's department. Yeah, and then the other one is the heartbreaker character who, you know, has had her fair share of men. So it's quite interesting and refreshing in that sense. And it's actually pretty, like I think the male leads are quite charming, if I might say so myself, which is why I'm always attracted to K-dramas. But yeah, I thought in this series, there's a new guy, up and comer rookie, Baek Sang-chu, and he's very, very cute. So.
And you know, Jen, you mentioned it earlier as well, and even in our interviews with you previously as well, that you like to recommend shows which are a little under the radar. Likewise for this one as well. And you know, because it's snappy, it's very succinct, 20 minutes, would you recommend then this drama for those who want to jump on the bandwagon, the K-drama bandwagon?
Yes, definitely. If you are new to like K-drama romances, this is a really good entry point because K-dramas can often feel very demanding of your time because you like log on to say Netflix or View or you tune into TV and one episode is like 30 minutes. So like as a total newcomer, you're just like, do I want to devote this much of my time to a K-drama? Like, I'm not even sure if it's good, right? And it can be quite a challenge in that sense. But this one is only like 20 minutes per episode. So if you watch one episode and you're like, I'm not into it, then you can just not watch it again. But like if you're into it, you can kind of keep on watching, and the momentum is it's pretty fast paced, and it gives you a good idea of how K-drama construct romances, which is like, you know, there's always the cute guy, and then there's always like maybe a second male lead who pops up, who is also alluring in his own right, but you don't know whether he will get the girl, you know. So there's like some tropes in there that are pretty like well trodden. There's also the older woman with younger men, which is like a pretty popular K-drama romance trope in recent years. So if you're like new to it, you can just hop on, see whether you're into that. I think it can be a pretty good entry point for like total novices.
Well, thanks very much, Jan. That was journalist Jan Lee telling us all about a binge-worthy K-drama, How to Be 30. You can watch this 15-part series on online video platform ITE. New episodes drop every Tuesday and Saturday.
Now let's go straight to journalist Anjali Raguraman. She's going to share more on Misfits and Roxy, both at the sale in Marina Bay. Anjali, we know Misfits as a great place for Mediterranean fare. Perhaps less known is Roxy, the bar hidden in Misfits. Now it's reopening next Wednesday, March the 10th. What's the draw of such a concept? You know, a speak easy inside a restaurant. Wouldn't it be the same if I were to just go to a restaurant that serves drinks as well?
Well, it's not quite the same because while, Roxy is within Misfits, the vibe is completely different. Like, one is a airy, spacious, open air space with like Mediterranean food, and it's really bright. And then Roxy is hidden away and it's much smaller. It's like a seedy little backstage bar with like red lighting, and you can only fit in like 8 or 10 people at a time. So I quite like this idea of being in one location but making a night of it, you know, without having to travel. So this is especially given the 10:30 p.m. curfew we have. So you gotta, you start dinner early, and then you have your dinner, and then you move over to Roxy, which is, like I said, hidden away. And you feel like you're in a completely different space without having to hop in a cab and go to some other bar. So like you mentioned, Mediterranean food, right? So Misfit, it has all the cool stuff from the Italian, Spanish and Greek region. It's a very streamlined Mediterranean menu. But then when you go to Roxy as well, it's like cocktails and bar snacks inspired by New York, stuff from New York. Yeah.
Yeah, so Anjali, on that point, you are the cocktails connoisseur among us. So what are your top recommendations at Roxy?
Oh, Roxy is brilliant. It's like all my favorite things, from like the glam rock playlist to the drinks named after like David Bowie and the Police songs. So yeah, one of my favorite drinks is the Negroni. They call it "You Don't Have to Put on the Red Light," like, which is named after the Police song Roxanne. And there's also Jean Genie, which is named after the David Bowie song. It's a twist on a daiquiri, which is a rum-based cocktail. This version comes with a little twist that is pear brandy in the mix as well, and the whole rim of the glass is dipped in powdered icing sugar. Yeah, so it's a bit sticky to the touch, but it looks cool and it makes it taste pretty great as well. There's bagel popcorn, like popcorn that is coated in bagel seasoning, and then there's a Cat's Deli pastrami sandwich, which is inspired by Cat's Deli, of course. So yeah, as you mentioned, it's open from 10th March next week, and I think you're going to see me there quite a bit.
Well, thanks as always, Anjali, for coming on the show. We've been speaking with Anjali Raguraman, journalist at the Straits Times Live Desk.
Check out the Friday pages in tomorrow's live sections for more ideas on what you can do during your weekends.
That's right. And for more news and videos, do visit straitstimes.com and of course subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryantriman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on A Big Story.